The city of Munich, Germany will migrate more than 20,000 PCs from a Linux-based desktop operating system to Windows 10 by 2020. It's a setback for the open source movement, but according to TechRepublic's Nick Heath, it might not be the gut punch it seems. Nick, you've been following the story for a long time. First, Munich switched to Linux, and then they had some issues, and then they decided to switch back. But what is the final decision on the future of Linux and LibreOffice in the city of Munich?
Well, the final decision was taken last Thursday. Basically, it's been rumbling on for a number of years. The first sign that something might be wrong was in 2014 when the new mayor, Dieter Reiter, was elected, and he raised a number of problems with IT at the council and placed the blame to a large extent on the use of open source software. And since then, you've had numerous meetings where they've discussed the future of Linux with this proposal earlier this year to move to Windows 10 from 2020. And it was that decision that was actually upheld by the council last Thursday. So it pretty much is the end of the Linux project, Linux being the Linux-based OS that they were using at the council. Kind of a confusing name because there's similarity, but it's actually based on Ubuntu, the Linux-based OS. So that is now going to be phased out from 2020, and at the same time, they're going to be moving. There's confusion on the figures, but it's somewhere around 29,000 possibly PCs to Windows 10. And that's going to be finished about 2023. So that's starting in 2020 and then should be complete by 2023. And it's going to cost them round about 50 million euros. So not cheap.
Not cheap. And the time investment, not cheap either. So what was the final straw? What pushed the council to drop Linux?
Well, it's quite a difficult question to answer because it depends who you ask. There were some problems with IT at the council, but an independent IT consultants, Accenture and a German company called ARF, they looked at IT at the council and found that most of the problems were organizational, not related to the use of open source software. And in fact, the fact that they still use some Windows machines at the council, those Windows machines also suffered from similar problems to the open source software that they use. So, and they said the problems were software was outdated, it took too long to fix bugs. But this broadly seems to be because they've got 20 different IT departments spread across the city, each have their own procedures. And so it's just a recipe for confusion, really, when it comes to rolling out patches. But the official reason is that they can't afford to run Windows and Linux side by side because they've always kept a minority of Windows machines, about 20 to 40%, depending on who you ask. And they say they can't run Windows and Linux side by side because it's not economically viable. However, they've been running them side by side for years, and it's only very recently that it's come up as a problem.
So we've written a lot about the different learning lessons of open source, but this seems like a fantastic learning lesson for companies, for other governments, to at least examine and extrapolate some useful information from the project. But was this project itself a failure, or did Munich as well learn from this experiment?
I don't think it's necessarily a failure. I mean, the consensus seems to be there's just been a change in political leadership at the council. The CSU party, which have a long history of opposing the use of open source software, they're now in coalition with the SPD party. So it's them coming to power or being in that ruling coalition that seems to have triggered the move back to Windows. But as for learnings, it's probably one of the main mistakes that Munich may have made was deciding to roll their own version of of a Linux-based OS. They used Ubuntu, but they made it a custom-based version of Ubuntu. So they may have been better going with a much more vanilla flavor of Linux and sticking with that rather than trying to take on so much. But as I say, it seems like the actual motivation between the change is not really necessarily anything technical. It's more political.
So sudo apt-get Windows for the time being. Nick Heath is a senior reporter for TechRepublic and ZDNet. You can follow all of his reporting around this incredible narrative of Munich's switch to Linux and then back to Windows by visiting TechRepublic and ZDNet. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe to the TechRepublic open source newsletter.